You will likely see my presentation, but not me because I'm going through my phone trying to once again push the boundaries of digital collaboration. So I'm using the Samsung Dex experience just to see, how we can move forward. So with that, I will go ahead share my screen, and then uh, let's make sure that you guys can all see me as in see my presentation. If not, let me know.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, fantastic. All right, and it is great. I mean, this is not going to be one of those dead by PowerPoint sessions. Those will come later. This is really meant to be interactive, and this is really meant to uh, share my perspectives as well as industry trends that I am privy to, where we are coming up to the throes of establishing trust on something that is inherently not very trustworthy because you can create multiple personas of yourself, right? So the topic today is literally blockchain is just a way of doing it. Blockchain is not the only thing that is there, but how do you trust digital identities, claims to certain authorizations in a world where you cannot physically reach out and touch the other person, right? So what do we mean by that? We have a problem at hand when it comes to the internet. Let's kind of rewind maybe 30 years, right? When most of us were in like school and college and stuff like that. When you wanted to go buy something, let's say you wanted to go buy a tape player, you would essentially end up at a store. You saw the tape player, somebody played it for you, and then they told you about how it has been imported from Japan or something like that, right? I'm just talking about those who are in India, by the way, right? Uh, because Japanese tape players were supposedly the best. And then, you paid physical cash and then you carried the physical goods away, right? That was pretty easy, right? You had physical verification of every item that formed the transaction at every point, at every step of the way. Fast forward today, you go to a site, you look at something that looks like, obviously, you're not buying a tape recorder, I hope so, right? Let's say you're buying a digital music player or something like that, right? And you pay Amazon or Flipkart in digital currency, yes, including the credit card information that you're transferring, that is digital currency. And you're expecting that good to show up at your house exactly as advertised based on the interchange of currency. We have essentially moved away from the physical touch and feel world, right? Our parents would think that we are crazy, and they might even be right. So, what is the problem at hand? The problem at hand is when used correctly, the internet is an amazing place, right? You can essentially extend yourself digitally to do a lot of things. And then there's not everybody who's using it right. So, let's consider this, right? For anyone who doesn't know who Julia Roberts is, you might be in the wrong presentation because if you haven't seen Pretty Woman, you missed out a large part of your life, right? As simple as that. So Julia Roberts, very famous American actress, shot to fame in this like Cinderella type movie in the 90s called Pretty Woman. Now, obviously, she's a public figure. However, there is nothing that will stop someone from going and creating a Julia Roberts profile, or for that matter, any public figure profile. What will end up happening is you have essentially now seen the rise of alter egos. I mean, there was a movie, I guess, at one point, that I Want to Be Madhuri Dixit. I guess, that was a Hindi. That's a Hindi translation of the Hindi title, right? Well, I want to be somebody else. I could be, John Wayne, right? For all I care. What is the problem with that? The problem with that is, while to some it's very innocent, role playing, To others, it's a real life business. And that real life business is creation of these fake identities filled with fake information, and not just in like a social media platform like Facebook. As an employer, this is something that hurts me, right? We will look at the LinkedIn profile of someone and we're like, okay, maybe this guy is good or this lady is good. And then we go and start digging up and, we do a preliminary interview and this person doesn't sound even remotely close to what that person is supposed to be on paper, right? So personal experience. I was looking for a data scientist. Someone looked fantastic on paper. And my recruiting team said, okay, we'll get this person in. And yours truly knows a little bit about data science and a little bit about neural networks, having dabbled in that when I was in college, right? And that person couldn't answer some basic questions. So finally, I had to break it down to the person. I say, "Oh, what's going on?" And this person was like very very straightforward. She was like, listen, I am a data engineer, which is SQL Server type engineer, like a DBA. I figured that being a data scientist would be better. So they actually got somebody to write a data scientist profile for them. These services are available, right? Essentially, you can create a fake persona. And there are people who are good at making fake personas for you. So what that does is, and that creates an inherent problem of trust, right? Trust that you could be anyone on the internet, right? I mean, Mahesh, not to pick on you, but tomorrow, if you were to say that, you were the president of the country of India, at least on the internet, there's nobody to stop you from doing that. And yes, you can do that, right? It's quite another thing that, you might have a few intelligence services coming after you, but that's a different issue, right? But only once they figure it out, right? So in the time that your fake identity is up and running, you can exploit it for quite a few things, right? And there is a dark side of the internet, right? Which is also called the Tor. Tor was actually, if you expand it out, it's called the onion router, right? So this is the unregulated part where identities are traded, fake identities are created, engineered, and then there are various illegal activities that are, promoted. You have illegal drugs that are purchased on the Tor. Um, so due to phishing attempts and social engineering attempts, whatever IDs are created, those IDs are on sale at the Tor. And the reason why we know this is very simple. We also monitor the Tor, just so that we know, which one of. So we have cybercrime protection products. So we have a whole army of people and virtual workers, which is robots, right, that are monitoring the Tor, just seeing whether we have identities of insureds that are showing up, right? So, any questions till now? Or everybody still reeling from this?
No, good. Go ahead.
Okay, good. So now the 2020 pandemic of this COVID-19, or as President Trump likes to call it, the Kung Flu, right? I don't know why he calls it that way, but bottom line is that this has forced social distancing, and this has forced an odd way of working where, we're all working from home, right? And in this working from home, needing to trust identities on the internet, whether it be individual identities, whether it be corporate identities, is a critical affair. I will just give you a couple very simple examples, right? Okay. The first thing that happened when the pandemic hit New York, right? I live in Connecticut, which is right next to New York State. I mean, I'm about 40 minutes from New York City, right? By train. So the first thing that happened, and you would expect, like, oh, wait a minute, this guy's going to tell about, like, some, military action or no. The first thing that happened in New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey, which is known as the tri-state area, is Bread vanished. Okay, we can't do much about that. Isopropyl alcohol vanished. It's not like people are drinking it. It's the disinfectant, right? And the third thing that vanished was hair clippers, right? So there are two major manufacturers of hair clippers. One is Remington, and the other one is Wall, right? Remington is primarily made in China, so there was obviously already an existing supply chain issue. Wall is not made in China. Wall is made in Madison, Wisconsin, right? They fabricate everything. But wall clippers are also very professional clippers, and the typical entry level clipper is about $40, and they go all the way up to about 150, right? And those are like super professional. The first thing that happened is when these vanished, then they essentially the black market started, right? And this black market that started was very quickly shut down by the likes of Amazon and eBay, right? All right. So as soon as those were shut down, you started seeing a whole host of websites start popping up, right? Like Pro Barber, Bob's Hair, and stuff like that, right? Here's how the scam was played out. They essentially advertised the product. So if anyone is interested, the actual spelling of the product is Wall, Wahl. You can go research it on yourself, right? So they would advertise a wall clipper exactly according to MSRP, and they would even promise free shipping and everything else. You went in, you entered your credit card information, great. They would send you an order confirmation, and in about a day they would say, well, we're out of stock, and so they would cancel your order, saying that we will update you once your order can be fulfilled, right? Sounds like a standard workflow, right? But it's not, because what just happened is somebody got your credit information, somebody got your personally identifiable information, and now you become a sellable commodity on the tour, right? Oh, by the way, you never got the clipper, right? So what just happened? People were able to set up very quickly Amazon and Walmart type experiences, which are obviously very easily done these days, without having a genuine company behind it to fulfill any of the orders with a malicious intent. And I'm just talking about the company side of it, right? Similarly, like, we have now gig economy companies like, Uber and, Fiverr and all. They are starting to get regulated very heavily by the governments, local governments, for some reasons, for very specific reasons, because people with fake identities, with unverifiable information, had started providing services. And when the governments got involved, they realized, wait a minute, this person is a felon. You cannot have a felon who's providing a service. Like, you don't want to have somebody who's, let's say, a serial rapist driving women back home in the middle of night, right? It's just, that just doesn't happen in a civilized country, right? So what has ended up happening is this need for trust of digital identities, so that that digital identity can be mapped back to a physical individual or a physical institution, is ever greater today, right? So, there's a bunch of data that is out there in terms of how much ID theft costs us, how much fake data costs us, how much compliance costs us, right? And those are all good points, right? But the fact is that as long as there is a loophole, there are people who are going to be looking to exploit that loophole for their personal gain, right? So now let's come to digital trust, right? We've talked enough about what's missing. That's fine and nice. It's missing, it's missing, it's missing. But what do we do about it? Do we have the capabilities today in the current set of frameworks and architectural patterns to establish a trust network. So if that is a intent, we do have a way of doing it. But first, let's understand what are the needs on both sides of the house, right? And when I say customers, like I mean really individuals, right? And then companies are institutions, right? So as an individual, when you go to a new site on the internet, let's say you're looking for a hair clipper, right? The question out here is, can you trust the the organization that's advertising the services, the product, right? How do we how do we go ahead and essentially establish that these individuals and these organizations are really who they are claiming to be, right? Now that becomes a much bigger issue, and in certain countries, it's taking shape in terms of regulations. Like in the United States, we have something called the Better Business Bureau, right? So if I have a doubt about a given organization, I can always go look it up in the Better Business Bureau, which is, by the way, kind of like a not a government organization. It's kind of a industry organization. At that point, you say, hey, this company has no BBB registration, and right there, I'll be like, okay, I don't know whether I want to deal with this company, right? There isn't something like that for individuals, but the fact is there, right? There is a common need for data privacy, data security. There is a question in terms of the actual valuation of goods and services delivered, right? And lastly, the reliability with which it is delivered, right? Will somebody take your data and also sell you out on the internet, right? And not on the internet legally, like how Google or Facebook does it, because they also sell your data, but like one of those fake stores which take your credit card information, and they very nicely decline, saying that, oh, we're sorry, right? They haven't taken a single penny from you, and you don't realize what theft they have done till many, many months later, when there are multiple credit lines opened in your name, right? So that is part of identity theft, right? So so in blockchain, what we are doing is we are essentially going ahead and enabling the ability to trust identities, right? What I mean by that is the main objective out here is to enable trust. Whether we do it via blockchain, whether we do it via uh, you know public shared key infrastructure, right? It's immaterial. But there is a implementation pattern that actually enables us to clearly identify and associate identities to individuals or companies and record all transactions in an immutable manner, so that nobody can come and fudge with it and essentially create fake IDs, fake transaction histories, fake conversations, so on and so forth, right? Any questions till now?
No.
All right, cool. So, this is just a simple way of going about it. What's really a blockchain? A blockchain is nothing other than a a bit of data that is stored across multiple nodes. Here's where it becomes difficult for anyone to fake it, right? And they are all interlinked, so that the entire set of actions that are recorded on a blockchain become a trusted audit trail of anything that has happened, right? So yeah, I'm talking about transactions first, so that we can then back channel into how identities can be established, right? So what is represented out here is that, hey, how do we know what is going on? Let's say we're trying to record a basic transaction, right? I want to go buy a wall clipper, right? And this time I'm not going to go to one of those silly fellows, right? I will essentially go to a real store like Walmart, right? Or in the case of India, Flipkart, right? And I'm trying to buy a clipper, at which point, right, it goes and says, hey, this clipper is being sold to Bob, right? Now, when I get that clipper and I say, okay, fine and nice, I've registered that clipper now. Uh, the second block is written, right? Now, let's say something goes wrong with this clipper, right? I'm not going to go back to Flipkart or, for that matter, Walmart to get this serviced. I will go back to Wall, right? WAHL, because I say, hey, listen, you sold me this clipper. It's within the warranty period. Service me. Instead of Wall asking me to provide a sales receipt, which I may or may not have, because who holds on to sales receipts, right? Wall can basically say, hey, send us your serial number, right? And at that point, I send them the serial number. They go ahead and query it and say, oh, yeah, this was really done. Walmart sold it to Bob on such and such date, and Bob received it on such and such date, which means, this is within warranty. Okay, fine and nice. So then Wall goes ahead and says, hey, listen, we will service the clipper, right? And I send it to Wall. They do whatever they need to do, and they send it back to me, right? Now, as you see, all of this is getting stored and recorded in a massively distributed ledger, right? And every time you write to it, you cannot overwrite it, right? So this sounds very simplistic when it comes to like these clippers and all. Now, what's the real application, right? Let's talk about tampering. Now, tampering about the service record of a hair clipper is not as exciting. But let's talk about cars, right? So let's say Mahesh bought a 7 Series BMW, right? Um, Beautifully maintained and everything else, right? And then, as he was driving back home, God forbid, some drunk driver hit him on the side panel, right? And then Mahesh goes ahead and sends the car over to the shop, because now the car is dented, maybe the body frame is also twisted. And what ends up happening is the guy at the shop says, Mr. Mahesh, we'll buy this car off you. We'll give you the insurance, because the insurance is saying that they're going to total the car. So we'll buy it off of you for the salvage value, right? Mahesh looks at it and is like, okay, fine. I was going to upgrade to another 7 Series anyways. So he walks away with the money, right? What that guy does, the workshop guy does, is instead of going through and creating a salvage title for the car, he fixes everything up, paints out the whole thing, and then sells the car as a pre-owned vehicle. This is the kind of scam that happens, right? Now, without having a trusted, distributed source of information, you are not going to ever be able to figure out what happened, right? However, if you use a service like Carfax, which, by the way, you started off with using a database and now they are onto blockchains, right? It's going to be impossible for this unscrupulous person to get away with selling this car, because the moment you go ahead and search for the vehicle's history, all this Ramayana is going to come up, right? The entire history is going to come up, like what's going on here, right? The car wasn't involved in a crash, and you will say, wait a minute, how come I never saw this? And Carfax is actually a service that is selling these services for a good amount of money every time you're researching a second-hand car. Dealers actually offer Carfax histories right up front, right? Now, in the insurance industry, now remember, they're getting all of this data from the insurance industry, because the insurance industry needs to protect itself. I'm part of the insurance industry, so I know how we have to create trusted data stores in order for us to be able to go ahead and get those points. In a blockchain, if all of this is recorded, you don't even have to worry about who's holding on to the data and all. All of this data is now pretty much tamper proof, right? So you can look at it and go like, wait a minute, man, somebody got hit, right? So I'm not going to go through and drain the blockchain pieces further, but I'm going to get down to what it really means, right? When you have a highly distributed blockchain, right, which is kind of the definition of it anyways, right? A highly distributed ledger, which is a blockchain. For somebody to be able to tamper with records at scale, it has to be a state actor, because they would have to take over more than half of all the nodes where your blockchain is stored, right? So individual small actors won't be able to do it. And if the state actor is trying to mess with you, they probably don't just want to mess with your basic blockchain records, right? So that's a different issue out here. Which what we are talking about here is much like herd immunity, right? The comfort in numbers and the comfort in the fact that once you've distributed a certain version of truth, that truth is copied over so many times in so many places that it becomes almost impossible to alter it, right? So with that in mind, how do you go ahead and essentially also record all other actions? So, blockchains have concepts called smart contracts, which are pretty much, the equivalent of real world contracts, but they are stored in the blockchain, they are immutable, they are distributed, and they essentially hold the original contract terms. Much like, how I described the original wall hair clipper, right? So all of these essentially lead to one and one thing only: your ability to trust the actual record of data and actions in a given widely distributed store, right? What we haven't addressed is the problem of, digital identity in physical identity. Now, that generally isn't exactly a blockchain use case, but marrying blockchains to a multi-factor authentication capability and then recording that authentication, successful authentication in a blockchain, makes it very hard for someone else to assume alternate identities. Because now you're not only just using a single point of verification. Let's say, I'll give you a very simple example, and, financial services companies are catching up with that very rapidly, right? You have this one-time password concept, right? When you're trying to do any transactions with your bank, typically your bank will say, hey, I'm going to send you a one-time password to your registered phone number. Now, in order for somebody to take that over, they would actually have to have physical control of your phone, right? That has been extended further to things like authenticators. So you have the Google Authenticator, you have the Microsoft Authenticator, you have the Okta Authenticator. So that way you are no longer physically limited to a given phone. You can then extend it to any of the registered devices that you claim to own, right? Now, imagine if all of these authentication actions were recorded in a blockchain, right? Obviously, that would be pretty expensive, in terms of just storage and action. But what that would do is suddenly it'll make it very difficult for someone to go ahead and say, hey, I am registering my new phone number because I don't have access to my previous phone number. Currently, there is a way for for you to fudge some of the lower security banks in Ireland to go just replace your phone number. In India, I know replacing a phone number for your bank is like an act of God, right? You have to promise your firstborn to them, whatever. And despite that, we have reports of so many frauds that are going on. So obviously, something's somewhere there is a loophole. What literally it's coming down to is how do you understand who is whom based on a consistent verification of their digital identities and mapping to their physical identities, right? So this is not native to blockchain, but all of these can actually be stored in the blockchain so that later on, if there is a attempt to change the actual verification modality of an individual, then you can look at the blockchain and go like, wait a minute, something's happening out here because this individual should never have a phone number in Nigeria, right? So let's look at some of the practical examples because I'm gonna now kind of and Mahesh, I think we will distribute some of this information, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I'm gonna get down to some of the interesting use cases that we are seeing, both from an insurance perspective as well as the more general employer and drug approval perspectives, right? So anybody heard of Gilead Sciences? No. Yes, maybe. They are the guys who made remdesivir, right?
Yes.
And
they have been given license to manufacture or they have been licensing out to manufacture in India.
Yes. So the funny part is that remdesivir is going to be manufactured in India, and India is also going to have remdesivir access. Interestingly enough, if Europe needs any access to remdesivir, which is a drug to fight COVID, then they will have to buy it from India because the U.S. company will not sell anything to Europe.
I mean, that's it's all been taken off by you guys.
Yeah. So America has bought the entire year's supply of remdesivir that can be manufactured, right? But how did a drug get so quickly fast-tracked? Has anybody asked? Has anybody wondered what's going on, right? What you're required to do by the FDA, Food and Drug Administration out here, is that you
Bob, is it possible for you to slightly enhance your screen, because this is something people would like to see, I guess? You can just zoom up or do a screen display.
I don't have that specifically in the this thing on out here.
Okay, sure, no worries.
I'm just talking to it, right?
Okay.
I mean, there are other case studies that I'm doing, but this one I'm just talking to it because
sure.
I wasn't sure that I could. Yeah, no, that's fine. That's good. That's a good thing that you're asking.
Yeah.
So what it is that Gilead Sciences essentially realized that in order to rapidly establish bioefficacy, which basically means that you're not selling snake oil, unlike Lala Ramdev, who's selling something like corn, I guess, right? You have to essentially report the biostatistics or the efficacy of the drug, right? The bottom line out here is very simple. When a test is carried out, the drug is supplied along with placebos, right? The drug is not supplied. Not everybody gets a drug, so that way you can determine, what is the ability to cure oneself vis-a-vis the placebo, right? And what they did was they essentially put it all out on a blockchain. That blockchain was actually initially built by Pfizer, and then it's now available to everyone. It is called phase 3 trials blockchains, right? And what essentially ended up happening is it created immediate transparency. The FDA had immediate visibility to the efficacy of the drug, right? Including visibility to adverse events and serious adverse events. A serious adverse event is you took the drug and you died, That's a serious adverse event, right? Versus an adverse event is you took the drug and you took a turn for the worse. So that way, as these incidents were happening, right, as the trial was being run in South America, and it was being run in like 3 different countries in South America where there is a rampant infection. All this data was becoming visible right away. So at that point, statisticians figured out, well, this is way more effective than the placebo, and it is curing more than killing, right? That's basically the qualifying factor. So has the drug been certified for use? General use, no. But it is certified for specific use under life-threatening circumstances, which is called New Investigative Drug License, NIDL, okay? It got its NIDL much faster than any other drug in this world, right? And that's the backstory to that. By enabling data visibility and transparency and just saying, listen, it's all out there. We are not going to take all this data and then we are going to churn it and give it back to you. And then some auditors are going to come and look for the back end of the data. They said, everything is out there. Go. You want to take a look? Go take a look. That is what helped them, right? What else? So there's another organization that I'm aware of. So this is the biggest pain point for me as an employer, right? When I have to go find an employee, right? It is very expensive. And when I say it's very expensive, the actual process of doing the background verification is not expensive at all, right? It's bupkis. What is really expensive is the time that my team has to spend on an individual, qualifying that individual, and then interviewing that individual, only to figure out, well, that individual lied about something, right? As a matter of fact, I've had it as recently as last month when I was going to employ somebody, and then the background verification came back that the person claimed that they had a master's degree and they had never been issued a master's degree, right? That person is like, something like 56 credit hours short of a master's degree, right? So we had to essentially rescind our offer of employment, right? So I'm aware of an organization. This is, I think, this is the one. Yeah. So there is, so I put up a slide on this. Okay, so in order to solve this issue, in terms of digital identity and actual trusted claims, there's another organization that's coming up very quickly. It's called Validate Me Online, right? And I'm trying to figure out when they will start servicing the U.S. market, because obviously there are PII and other personal information and data residency restrictions out there. But what it does is essentially creates a distributed ledger, a blockchain store of identities and the credentials that are claimed by those identities, right? So that way, what will end up happening is, let's say, I go ahead and put in my credentials, right? I say, Bob Das, I went to, these schools in India and this college in India, and, I did these other certifications in the US and blah, blah, blah. And now I'm the CIO of Munich Reinsurance, right? Truth be told, everyone on this call, until and unless you can actually go to, the Munich Reinsurances, who are our, who is our leadership team, you will not be able to verify that, whether Bob Das is a real person or, I'm just like bullshitting, right? It's quite possible. We just talked about how we could create a fake identity. Hell, I could even call myself Julia Roberts, although Julia Roberts doesn't really sound like this, right? So once I make these claims, this platform goes ahead and essentially does first-party validations of these claims, right? So let's say I go ahead and say, hey, I studied at St. James School, Calcutta, right? So great. Now, remember, right now, most networks are essentially doing third-party validation, right? You know, if you look at Monster or LinkedIn, right? Any of these, yeah, great. This is a school that exists, and this person says that this person went to the school. Great, must be telling the truth, right? Obviously, everybody is truthful, right? Obviously not. So instead of just relying on a third-party statement, there is a first-party validation. So this comes once again back into the old blockchain contracts, right? So once I make a claim that I went to St. James School, Calcutta, that claim is going to get verified by someone who goes back and says, did this person really attend this school? Obviously, the school will go through its records and say, yeah, this person attended school from then and then. So at that point, what happens is this entire transaction will get recorded in the blockchain. And the next thing that happens thereafter is this becomes an immutable record. So let's say, 5 years down the line, I go ahead and I'm going to leave Munich Re and I'm going to join Zurich Re, right? At that point, I can say, here's my validated list of claims from this trust platform. Right? Let's say validate me online as at that point doing business in the USA, right? What that does is that immediately essentially establishes the level of transparency and the level of trust that is necessary for us to operate, right? Because Zurich Re doesn't have to go through and figure out whether I worked at each and every employer, because that's how most validation services work, right? They ask you for pay stubs from employers. Like, what is this, stupid, right? You keep on doing the same thing over and over and over again, right? This is an underserved market. Now, how will it help me as an employer, right? Right now, the typical background verification process for my organization is close to 14 calendar days. If the person is only claiming experience and or educational qualifications and work credentials from the territorial United States. Once it goes international, it could go up to a good 4 weeks, even 5 weeks. I recently had somebody that I hired out of the UK, and it took me 7 weeks to get that person's background verified, right? Now, imagine going from 7 weeks to maybe a couple minutes, because you essentially have a validated store, right? And why does it help at that point? Because once you have gone to school, it's like, it's not like I will go back and say, you know what? Forget about going to, St. James School where I went from kindergarten to 12th grade. I will now go to Calcutta Boys School. I can go back and change the past, right? So once my past is validated, there's no point in going and revalidating my past, because I'm just trying to work for a separate company and there's a separate background verification company that's doing it, right? So this is one of those like process improvements and missed opportunities that is there. And there are several other use cases like this. So think of it this way, right? If we could create a blockchain, marry it with appropriate digital identity creation and verification processes, regardless of who's consuming it, right? I just gave you two different examples. One was of Gilead Sciences, which is on Pfizer's blockchain set. Then there's Validate Me Online, and there are several other examples out there. What you now have is a fantastic way of creating a trusted network of identities and actions in a virtual world. Kind of sounds like an oxymoron, but it's not, right? So with that, I'm going to pause for some questions, because I've been talking a lot and I'm pretty sure there's a whole bunch of people who are
thank you,
itching to
Bob.
ask some
Very
questions.
nice. I think very informative. Gives us a lot of food for thought. So grab your sip of water, and then I will start with some questions which we have received.
Thank you.
Okay, and to all participants, please keep the questions coming through the chat function, and we are happy to take them. Okay, Bob, the first
Yeah.
question which I would want to throw at you is the Indian UPI on blockchain?
The
The very
Indian
popular, the universal payment interface.
Yeah, so the universal payment interface itself, as far as I know, is not, right? But it is ripe for the actual payment records are ripe for a blockchain use case, right?
Okay.
So, and that's so that the verification whether a given payment was made or not and what goods and services the payment was made for is essentially something that could be easily uh, activated and monetized, right? Um,
Yes.
so yeah, and this is essentially the ultimate smart contract storage place.
So we have a question from Amitabh. What is public ledger in blockchain, and how is this going to work, or how does it work?
So a public ledger. Okay, so this in when you're talking about a blockchain. Um, is typically used in the context of cryptocurrency, and when you talk about a public ledger being the only aspect of blockchain that you are using, actually blockchain is a type of public ledger anyways, right? Where you are essentially recording various transaction details after obviously enough authentication and verification of all the different participants. The fact is that we are actually using the underlying capabilities of this public distributed ledger, but recording activities that could necessarily be non-monetary in nature, right?
Yep.
So let's talk about this, right? So
Yes.
in a cryptocurrency, right? This is where the concept of the concept of a public ledger is, by the way, very old, extremely old. It is at least like Middle Age England type old, right? Now, a digital public ledger obviously is not old, but it uses the same idea. And a public ledger is, originally was used to record things like rainfall, right? What was the rainfall for a given, year, and what was the price of wheat, right? So that people couldn't just say, oh, I bought this wheat for this much, because that was what was used to tax farmers in Middle England, right? In a blockchain public ledger, what you're doing is you're essentially storing various information in several blocks that are now exposed. When you look at a blockchain as that, then you're looking at it as a general purpose. When you just want to use ledgering capabilities, then you're using it for proof of work cryptocurrency purposes. So, and we haven't touched on cryptocurrencies because that's
Yes.
really not the focus of this call.
Sure. Thank you. Appreciate that. Before I take the next question, just giving an open offer to schools, colleges, universities, or any institution which wants to do its record keeping through Validate Me for the reports, for the student reports. Do let us know, and we are happy to talk with them and have you onboarded. That's a wonderful offer which we are offering you. Okay, take us on it, is what I would say. Okay, just imagine, like Bob was saying, that you could keep your records as you move from institution to institution. Your records are in a digital locker, very safe and validated. Okay, so Bob, I want you to wear your predictive hat, and And tell us 3 areas where you see blockchain driving transformation.
Okay, so the areas where I truly believe blockchain is going to drive major transformation are number one, in the current ownership of real property, right? Because right now, the way real estate and real property is transacted is extremely inefficient across the world, right? It's not just in India, not just in the US. In the US, there's actually a insurance product called title insurance, right? Because we can never figure out, who had the original title to the land. So if somebody else comes and challenges your title, then, the title, the land and the structure will have to be paid for, right? So insurance companies make a bunch of money on that. At the same time, they also lose a bunch of money on that, right? So having a public distributed ledger of real property ownership, which is land or investment in infrastructure, especially in public-private investment ownerships, that would be very, very effective, because that then can be used as effective collateral against what is known as sublending, right? So a sublending is you have, let's say, Mahesh, let's say you have a 0.5% ownership in the bridge that goes from Noida to New Delhi, right? That bridge used to be a small bridge, by the way. Now it's a huge bridge that is always jammed up.
It's a huge one, yeah.
So, yeah, but you put in money to have sub ownership. Now you can essentially borrow money against that in order to finance another endeavor of yours, right? Because the bridge is not going anywhere, right? Let's just put it this way. Nobody's selling the bridge. So it is essentially the ability to effectively establish ownership without a spread of doubt. That is one area of transformation for us. And this can be extended to any kind of property. Then the other area of transformation that I see happening is in the insurance industry, which is actual mechanical failure insurance, where I see various opportunities to better manage data. Now, I'm talking just from an insurance industry perspective because that's what interests me. But if I look at it from a general perspective also, it really becomes one of any kind of maintenance records, right? So you buy an air conditioner, right? The air conditioner is serviced, maintained, whatever, warranted, so on and so forth. Based on the maintenance records, there is actually a different, there is a different depreciation schedule that is followed, right? Based on what is known as, retained residual values, okay, RRVs. So most people will fudge that data, right? And for an air conditioner, it makes no sense. But when you're talking about like multi-million-dollar, excavators and, real high dollar industrial equipment.
Maybe even aircrafts for that matter.
Yeah, aircrafts are already down that road. Okay, by the way. So De Havilland Corporation and Beach Aircraft have already started doing that, where anytime they're doing any kind of maintenance, they're putting that maintenance record on a public blockchain, so that when these are generally done for like private aircraft, so that like, let's say, somebody has a private jet, their entire maintenance record becomes available to the next owner who's going to likely buy that aircraft. Okay. So that way there is no chance of tampering, and the other owner can say, hey, this engines were serviced at the service ceiling, and these hydraulic systems are replaced, so on and so forth, right? So all of this is available. So the very bottom line out here is the transformation with blockchains that we see coming up and rapidly approaching us is essentially anything that would make a distributed ledger and distributed record of actions and fulfillment of contracts, accessible in a transparent manner to the general consumers of that platform. That is where the transformation is going to be, right? And you can see, employment. There's, Validate Me Online is already on it. In terms of biostatistics and drug efficacy, Pfizer and now Gilead Sciences is on it. Johnson and Johnson is also, making great strides. I think, various state and local governments have the capability of, leveraging this to the fullest extent, because any kind of equipment maintenance records, right? Especially equipment that is operated in a private-public partnership, not allowing that data to be fudged is actually in the interest of the taxpayer, right? So.
Good. I think we have time for one last question, Bob, and that is, you've told us about the strengths of blockchain. Where are the threats you see as far as blockchain is concerned? Where do you see cybersecurity issues related to blockchain? What happens if I lose the keys? So tell us more about that.
So this is a great question that you've posed, Mahesh. As far as cybersecurity is concerned, the actual ledger is constructed so that not only is the entire ledger encrypted, but also everything that is stored in the ledger is encrypted, and then they're chained together. So at the end of the day, is something fully secure? Absolutely not. But there are many more layers, and the barrier to break that security is harder. That's basically it, right? Nothing else. So it's actually very difficult to go ahead and, let's say, break into a well-secured blockchain, right? At the same time, what happens if, let's say, you lose a node, right? There's a physical failure or something like that. This is where redundancy comes to your assistance, right? So let's say there is a catastrophic failure of one or two nodes in, let's say, 100 node blockchain. Well, guess what? You essentially rebuild those nodes, and the entire blockchain that needs to be copied over gets copied down, and now you're back to full fidelity, right? Now the question out here is in terms of what happens if you lose your keys. That is a big problem, right? And that problem is that blockchain doesn't know you from, let's say, a hole in the wall, right? The only way you're authenticating yourself to the entire blockchain is by possessing the keys that allow you to access the blockchain, right? And those are usually 64 to 128-bit GUIDs, which obviously nobody can memorize. So there is a value-added service set that's coming in where, I'm seeing it both on, interestingly enough, the Trusted Traveler program that the US uses, which is known as Global Entry, that's also going on blockchain, right? So, but what they do is they map your passport number to the internal ID, right?
Okay.
Because every passport is a different passport, right?
Yes.
They could be owned by the same individual. Yeah, it's supposed to be, right? Yeah, but then you have people who can fudge those too. The long story short out here is that there is a higher level service that essentially makes it easier for individuals to interact with blockchains in a user ID password manner, right? So there is a intercept layer which has to be highly secured, because that's the only way you can actually fudge yourself into somebody else's record set. So that piece has to be built really well with very high level of security and resilience. And typically what I do is I go through and will require things like white source bolt to be used to even figure out whether there are Easter eggs that are being left in the code, right? Whether the code itself is secure. There's dynamic security scanning and static security scanning of code. But long story short is, without that facility, it becomes difficult for users to get into blockchains. and you really don't want to lose those keys. So those keys are typically held in the equivalent of a key vault, and you access the key vault through a user ID password authenticator based mechanism. Because if you try to access blockchains natively with your native key set management, it's going to become impossible. All right.
Thank you. Thanks, Bob. Wonderful having you here. And
Thank
we
you.
hope that we continue this conversation further. And many people have appreciated your presentation and your talk today. I, on behalf of Human Touch, Mukesh and Amitabh, People Bridge, thank you very much. And before we let you go, also sharing with you that this is a series what we do. We have the next
Mm-hmm.
event coming on 24th of July on IoT and Industry 4.0 by Ashish Kumar Adhikari, who's a GM at Wipro. And it's going to be on the pillars of digital transformation. And I hope that many of you continue to join. And Bob, just to let you know, today we had an audience from Singapore, from Philippines, from India, from Dubai, from UK and other places. So
Lovely.
again, thank you very much. And I know it was an early
Yeah.
start for you and you had some fiber issues, but we know that how you overcame it. That gives us hope that digital transformation is here to stay. Thank you all and look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you.